For those of you that have just joined us, please know that Ms. Leslin added into the chat a link for our assessment. And so if you can work on the pretest, that would be fantastic. But welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see you all join us this morning. Give me just a second to acknowledge our, here we go, perfect. As we engage today, I invite each of you to keep in mind the articles that were offered to us as pre-readings in the Google Classroom. We shared those with everyone. One article was entitled Faculty and Curriculum, Examining Multicultural Competencies and Inclusion. And the other was entitled A Change is Gonna Come, Paradigm Shifts to Dismantle Oppressive Structures. And so we will engage with our takeaways from those two readings this morning in just a few moments. The other piece I wanted to have or encourage us to think about as we engage in discussion today and in the material is this question for our session. On your campus. Again, the question just for us to kind of wrestle with is, how have you observed cultural competency and inclusion play a role in shaping administration and academic leadership practices on your campus from your perspective? And hopefully being able to engage with each other will inform us in arriving at some thoughts around that question. A couple of housekeeping pieces that may be helpful. If you are comfortable and able to, at different points in our time together, definitely encourage you all to share your cameras with folks or share your screen with folks so that you can engage. I think in this work, it is very important to be able to see each other and interact with our nonverbals and our images. I think it's part of this process of developing cultural competency and awareness. But I also want to make room and understand that for some folks that may not be possible today because of challenges of connecting and or just everything going on in the background. And so to the best of your ability, if you are comfortable, please share your screens so that folks can interact with you fully. The other housekeeping pieces to help us kind of navigate our space together. If possible, please mute your screens or stay muted so that we are able to hear whoever is speaking. And so when we have a chance to engage in responses, I'll mute myself as well to give the floor to someone so that you can be heard clearly. As we did the last two times we've gathered, please use the chat feature to post any questions, and our team will definitely monitor the questions and share those as we go. I encourage folks to practice self-awareness. We will have more breakout sessions and more opportunities to engage in discussion, but definitely want us to take notice of our colleagues and share space to the best of our ability so that everyone has an opportunity to share their reflections and participate. And then finally, for all of you that I can see on my screen, you look amazing. Just know that we are recording this session. This is why I dress up and put on real adult clothes so that I can honor the recording that's happening of our session. And so just be aware that we are recording the session. With that said, just to give us an overview of our discussion today, we'll start out with just reviewing some outcomes that we have hoped for us to arrive at by the end of our session. We're going to dig into the conversation of cultural competency from the lens of administration and leadership. And we will also discuss some of the theories that were presented in the articles that we have reviewed. And we hope to participate and engage with each other in some case studies to help the theory come to life or bring the theory to action in our process today. And so this is the overview of today's presentation. as we move forward, let's see where my mouse is gone, y'all. Here we go. And so would like to definitely get started with just talking about our outcomes. And so as we see here, and was posted in the description of our presentation today, let me move my camera here just a bit. Our hope is to engage together in reflecting on how culture and diversity influences the work that we're engaged in. I think that this is a very timely and important conversation for us to really dig into together. And so how does this affect our work? Secondly, would like to develop an understanding of cultural competency as it relates to administration and leadership, and what we're seeing, giving us, hopefully building on our understanding of terminology, but also practice. And then finally, exploring strategies for developing these competencies. And so we don't just want to identify them, we want to see how we can move our work forward. You know, the purpose of the session, I think, is really to consider how leadership, administration, and human resource tasks that are common in higher education, um, to all of us in our work, really show up. And so these competencies are essential, that we will talk about for implementing or making progress in this work. And so I'm looking forward to what we will learn together in our conversations. So let's get started in administration and leadership. And what I want to do is just offer some thoughts around framing our discussion for today. And so as we get started, um, changes in what we are seeing around the country, around the world, in our society, technology, and also changes in the demographics of the students and our colleagues really present new challenges and opportunities in higher education around the globe for us to engage in. When we have such a beautiful opportunity or mix of cultures, sometimes the cultures that we're serving do not align or are competing, if you will, with the cultures that we enter spaces in higher education. And so that is definitely one piece of this conversation that we will dig into and look at. Secondly, it's really important for us in this ever-changing environment, for us to look at what is needed in terms of expanding the roles and responsibilities around cultural competency for administrators and leaders in our academic units. It is important for us to consider what is new, or what new and improved awareness, knowledge, and skills are necessary, and what action do we need to take to move this conversation and our practice forward in affirming ways for the communities that we're serving, for the communities that we're conducting research in, for the overall role that our institutions play. And so thinking about our underlying values and considering how those are shifting or changing is important as well. Multicultural competencies need to be infused into the administrative and leadership practices that we engage with, and those that is such an important aspect of our work in this critical time, because it provides meaningful and culturally relevant services. And without us focusing on this, it will be very challenging for us to be able to keep up with the demands and expectations of the students and communities that we serve. Finally, cultural organizational development, um, in terms of looking at our assumptions and biases, these particular theories that we have read in the articles that were provided to us before today and that we will engage in, really give us some space to think and to work related to this notion of how cultural issues are relevant in our work and need to be examined and addressed in different ways. And so these aspects of our work can include things like budgeting, strategic planning, staffing, program evaluation, supervision, leadership development, as well as things like promotion and student evaluations that we conduct in our classes, even the idea of creating deans and chairs accountability measures. All of these practices are important for us to consider in how our organizations develop and move forward. And so these are just a few ideas or pieces that we will incorporate in our conversations throughout the day. I wanted to share this particular quote with you all from our readings that I thought was very powerful and really captures this concept of why this work is important, or the why behind our work that is highlighted in Professor Williams' words. I believe that becoming a multicultural leader on campus actually requires one to embrace and infuse a variety of different tools and resources and models, and intentionally think about strategies that we can incorporate into our work, our research, and our teaching. This work is not easy. I want to emphasize that. It is not easy. I think we have a number of different challenges that we have discussed already as examples of why we need to support each other and find ways to continue our learning beyond today. And so I want to stop talking. That hopefully gives us a little bit of a overview and framing for our discussion today of what to look forward to. What I'd love to do is to give us a chance, or each of you a chance, to use your voices and really discuss or examine with each other what takeaways stood out from the readings. And so as we move into our first breakout room or discussion, would like to invite you all to think about what stood out from the readings. And the second piece is, are there thoughts, questions, or reactions that you have about the materials? We're going to give everyone about 7 to 8 minutes to engage in our first discussion. And then when we come back, would like to invite at least one person from each group to give us a summary of how your initial discussions went. Enjoy your first conversations, and we'll see you back in the main room in just a few minutes. Hopefully those were good conversations. I see some smiles on different faces. So it could be that I interrupted some good conversation. And if that's the case, I do sincerely apologize. Oh, I see head nods. Yes. Let me tell you all, family, the hardest thing about facilitating any kind of presentation is breaking up good conversation. So I do sincerely apologize. But if I didn't, then Dr. Cummings and Dr. Chandler would not invite me back, because we'd go way over time and I'd be in trouble. And so I do apologize. Would love to yield the floor and ask for volunteers to share maybe a little bit about how your conversations went. What were things that stood out from the readings to you?
So in my group, some of the things that ended up standing out to us in regards to the reading were from the article that spoke about diversity and bringing in student voices. It was more so geared towards administration and staff and support staff. So that's the one that I read. Um, Oh, and sorry, I'm Tonika Jones, and I'm representing Santa Fe College in Gainesville, Florida. So, something that I ended up speaking about was definitely letting student voices be heard. I know that that's something that has been a part of my student experience, both at the undergraduate level and graduate level, where we did get an opportunity to kind of be in the room and speak up about some of our experiences in order to try to help implement changes in our campus environment. Something else that was brought up was where basically faculty a lot of times white male faculty, they end up having, I guess, like a more so of a heightened sense of their cultural competence and knowledge about diversity. Something that me and my friends oftentimes refer to as white male confidence, just kind of having that heightened sense of, you know, kind of knowing what's what and having, I guess, like a heightened sense of self, but sometimes not being as aware as sometimes they should be. Another thing that we discussed in our group, and feel free to chime in. I'm having a hard time thinking of the third thing that we spoke about. I know it was
Tanika,
from
I
the
got your
article that
back.
a change is gonna come. What was it that you mentioned?
Thank you, Tanika. And of course, we have your back. Thank you for being our spokesperson. That other thing that we talked about from a change is going to come is that it's not enough to have good intentions and the heart and the desire to do it. There's got to be a plan for systemic change that is going to challenge the policies and the procedures that maintain the status quo. So we definitely have our work cut out for us in learning the theory so that we can apply it to the work that we do in a way that's going to lead to long-term and lasting change. So we really appreciated the model that was presented in the article, and know that there's much that we need to do, even with all our heart and the best desires.
Absolutely. Thank you
Oh,
all.
I'm also from Santa Fe. Sorry, I'm Naima Brown from Santa Fe College, and I work with Tanika and Dr. from Dr.
Ramming from FSU.
from
No worries.
FSU was with our group.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for your reflection. That's awesome. Do we have another group that wants to share?
I'll start sharing. Shannon Calloway and I were speaking in our group. We just had a small group. I'm Jenny Pollock. I'm from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I'll pick up on what Naima was saying. You know, we ended up speaking about this article a little bit more in terms of how it resonated with our experience. So Texas A&M Corpus Christi, we're a Hispanic serving institution. Corpus Christi as a community is Hispanic majority. And our undergraduate students definitely reflect that. Our faculty do not, and our graduate students really do not, particularly in the natural sciences. So I'm a biologist. So two things that really resonated with me. The first one is that, you know, we spend so much time in my field anyway, with different types of training. I mean, we get training ad nauseum. You know, we have training in how to be a scientist, scientific communication. We really do not get this type of training. It's not something that's built into our curriculum as graduate students, as faculty. And it's something that we deal with every single day. I mean, it's incredibly kind of refreshing to read something like this, to see that there are frameworks that can be applied. The other thing that I hear sometimes, and I think that this article does a good job of dispelling, is that this issue that it's just going to take a little bit of time. Like everything's going to work itself out. It just needs a little bit of time. And I feel like constantly fighting the battle of nothing has changed in time immemorial. So why is, you know, it's not just time. You need to put effort, and you need to me, from, I'm not an administrator, but to me, like, administrators need to put money behind these things as well, to provide, you know, professionals who can come in and do trainings and really make a different, kind of make a powerful impact that then is game changing for people to continue that education. Thank you.
No, thank you for that reflection. I couldn't agree more. I was using the quote yesterday with some friends around the Jerry Maguire movie. I love that particular film, the part or the quote that says, "Show me the money." That's one of my favorite I don't know if it was a hashtag back then. I'm dating myself, but it should be a hashtag today. You know, in administration, it's about show me the policies and show me the money, right? We've got to put policy work behind the choices that we want, how we shift and move our colleges, our administrative pieces, but also our academic units. There is lots of room for us to examine our administrative policies, our academic policies around the concepts of cultural competency and the money. I couldn't agree with you more, Jennifer. We need to put some dollars behind the choices that we are, the theories, the choices, the discussions that we're having. And so thank you for that reflection. That was awesome. I think we might have another group or two. Who wants to share next?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. I was in a group with Jody and Shuri. Yep, there you guys are. All right. Just briefly to summarize what this paper what this article really did for us, it sparked a conversation that we all are aware of, you know, about the systemic changes that need to be made in higher institutions. And just generally the fact that we have these conversations probably like, once or twice a year with staff members or administrators, but you really don't see much change happen. So it's really getting into the action of it and just, moving past, the whys and, the what ifs. It's just really probably getting more action out of this. So we also talked about the fact that in this paper, they mentioned the MCIM as an actual framework to help implement change and policies that should be happening at these institutes. And just the fact that we do need policies implemented to really change the structure and the framework of how these entire institutes operate nowadays. So typically just because, we're seeing these marginalized students making the same complaints that have been made, for the past 60 or 50 or 60 years, and nothing is really being done. We're having these conversations over and over, but it needs to move past that. And if you guys want to jump in, if I missed anything, just let me know. But yeah, this paper definitely brought to light the issues that are still happening and the fact that we need more implementation of policies to help bring these institutes up to where they need to be.
Absolutely, thank you. I do think in higher education, from our deans and colleges to our administrative units, we are excellent writers. We can come up with beautiful words for a PowerPoint or for a website, but there is a difference between those beautiful words and whether or not we follow through with those, right? And so hopefully we can get into some of that conversation of how do we follow through with some of these brilliant writing that we might see in our system. Thank you so much for sharing. Do we have one more group maybe?
I can share our groups. I was with Xingping and Eva, and this is Vasuda Sharma from Valencia College. And we actually talked about what you just mentioned, Miguel, in terms of how do you make it tangible in a content-heavy course. Two of us were actually, we teach chemistry, and we are always struggle for that time. So how do you get started? Like, how is it that the identities that the students bring in, how does the student find out? And so I shared my experience that I do the identity wheel, and the instructor has to take that first step. You are the, how do you say that? The person who pushes the cart, right? So you are going to direct where the cart is going to go. So you have to collect that information. And one of the things that was discussed in the readings, I was very happy to see that because I do a similar activity. I asked for who's your favorite scientist one morning, if you wake up as a scientist, what it would be. And they had a similar one. And so I was very happy to see, that there are people who are doing like little drops, eventually probably will come together. And what you're saying, those can be fancy words. And at the ground level, as instructors, we are the ones who have to probably, push it, roll it. And so I do agree with Jennifer, what she talked about in terms of dollars. Some effort has to be put from administrators and put in place. So
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. Thank you for that recap. Absolutely. I think that as we engage in our conversation, we will talk about how there is a role and there's room for all of us, from the classroom to the administrators in our colleges, but also at the institution, to play a role in creating space for students and for each other to really see ourselves in this work and to be able to bring our full selves into this space. And so I look forward to engaging further in the conversation. I will, as we transition, would like to share my screen again. And let's see. Move us from our initial discussion from the articles to really digging into the theory itself and maybe exploring some additional aspects that either did stand out to you or maybe some pieces for you to consider moving forward. And so as we talk about the change, right? And our goal today is really to talk about how do we pursue change from an institutional level, right? It is important for us to think about our syllabi. It is important for us to think about how we bring change into a space. But beyond ourselves, how do we look at systemic change or organizational change? And so this particular model, multicultural organizational development, is designed for us to really think about change from the individual perspective, from the group perspective, and the institutional perspective. This work is not new. It started in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and it was really a response to, or the creation of these models was a response to creating multicultural organizations. We saw significant shifts in our student body at the time. We were exiting or leaving I shouldn't say leaving, but we were coming out of the civil rights era as a formal era, if you will. And the result of that powerful movement of the 60s and 70s was that we had beautiful diversity in our student body, but we didn't necessarily have systems or organizations that were prepared for that change. I would say we still aren't prepared overall for the change, but we're coming along. And so this was a response to just the era or the shift in time. And so multicultural organizational development is defined as a systemic planned change effort. I'm going to repeat that. A systemic planned change effort that utilizes behavioral science knowledge and technologies for improving organizational effectiveness. The reason that I share that definition with us for consideration is that there are two aspects from my perspective in this work. This work, I came into this work because my heart was captured, right? From a personal place. My heart was definitely considering the aspects of a sense of belonging. How do I see myself academically in this institution? How do I see myself in terms of the scholarship I'm having to consume, the faculty that are teaching me? All of those pieces were important, but in addition to that, I think it was also important to consider, how has the institution prepared for me, right? I just left Florida State University after 14 years of service, and I used to talk to administrators when they would ask me, what can we do as we approach Hispanic serving institution status in preparation for that? And one of the things I used to say is, as a Latino administrator, I walk into 550 buildings on this campus and not one of them is named for a Latino researcher or a Latino scholar. More embarrassing, because I can pick on Florida State, it's my alma mater. This is that same theory. You can pick on your own family, but no one can talk about your family, right? And so I'll talk about my family for just a moment, because I have love for the institution, but I can also be critical and respectful of the institution. We use the Seminole imagery as a symbol and a mascot. But of those 550 buildings, we don't have one building named after a Seminole. And so there are things that we need to look at in terms of, how does the institution and the organization prepare to embrace community, identity, culture? What are things that we can do administratively, but also from the academic spaces to make sure that our students and our faculty, that different identities are included? And so this particular piece that you all have started talking about in your debrief of the articles is so critical. It requires us to be planful. It requires us to be intentional, and we have to find strategies that address systemic change, not just individual isolated change. And so we will get into those conversations. And so as we look at this particular theory, the multicultural organizational development theory, the authors, Pope, Reynolds, and Mueller, share a couple of things that reflect a healthy organization. And I want to share that with you all to get us started. From their research and their perspective, the following things are required for an organization or an institution to be healthy as it relates to multicultural competency. First is that it would reflect and include members of diverse cultures and social groups as full participants. An example to me is, we need to look at the leadership that's hired. And so, do we have diversity amongst the deans? Do we have diversity amongst the cabinet and the president or the chancellor of the institution? Do we have women as well as men? Do we have people of color in those positions? One piece that I will share with you all that I often talk to my colleagues about is we cannot lie to ourselves. It is inappropriate for us to say that our units are diverse if our custodial staff are the only brown faces or the only Latinx or Hispanic faces. It's inappropriate to say that our graduate students bring the diversity, but our leaders, our directors, our deans, our associate deans are all white, right? And so how do we reflect the population that we serve is very important. The other piece is beyond the representation of individual leaders and deans and instructors, how is our curriculum diverse? We have an international opportunity for us to bring in scholars from all over the world. But many times as researchers, we only focus on the theories that our faculty gave us. And so are women highlighted in your syllabi? Are women of color highlighted in your syllabi as researchers? Do we teach their theories? Or do we stick to a script that was handed to us 10, 20 years ago and not update that? And so we really need to think about how our work reflects and includes members as full participants. The other piece is that for a healthy organization to exist or an institution to exist as it relates to multicultural competency, it must act and follow through on commitments to eradicate social oppression. The word eradicate is my favorite word in this sentence because it isn't a passive term. I think our sister Jennifer mentioned this idea that, oh, we just need to give it time and it will resolve itself. That doesn't sound like that's the strategy to eradicate something. When I think of eradicate, I think of something that really bothers us, that really incites us to act. And so I will be very vulnerable and share that I am terrified of snakes. When I see the word eradicate, I think about the thing that scares me the most are snakes. And so if I found a snake in my house, I'm not going to just say it'll move along on its own. I'm going to work to eradicate that after I get off of the kitchen countertop where I will be standing and screaming at the top of my lungs for fear. And so just this idea of what does it mean for institutions and for systems to act and follow through on this commitment to eradicate, to get rid of something that either we are afraid of or know that is harmful, that we truly believe that this is not the way that we should proceed. And so think about these elements around built into this theory around what it means to have a healthy organization on the back end of things. One of the pieces that I want us to keep in mind too is the use or the purpose of this multicultural organizational development theory is the concept that it supports transformation of organization into more socially just and socially diverse systems. And so transformation is important. And this is the term I think that scares many of our older scholars I'll leave it at that in terms of we do want change. And I think we need to be transparent as we enter these conversations. I think our administrators, our deans, our leaders, we must be very open and clear that we're not looking at putting a Band-Aid on the problem. We are looking at significantly transforming our spaces to be more inclusive and transforming our curriculum, the literature that we consider, the theories, the scholars that we bring into awareness. And so when we're looking at this, we do this through questions or questioning and assessing our underlying beliefs, our everyday practices, and our core values. Again, what we're looking to do is questioning and assessment of underlying beliefs, everyday values, everyday practices and core values. And so that really is going to require us to take a step back and come up with a strategy to be able to fully engage in that concept. And so one thing that I wanted to share with you all that I think is just powerful, I'm a visual learner. It helps me to see things, right? I can read pieces, but visuals are definitely helping me in figuring out how do we get from point A to point B. And for me, a key piece of this work is to understand that organizations do not live in static monoculture places, right? Or they also don't just emerge as multicultural organizations or positions. Rather, they exist on a continuum. And I think this continuum is extremely helpful for us to be able to see progress, for us to measure how we're coming along, but also where we might, what our starting place may be. And so what I like to do is to share with you all a little bit of a descriptor of each of these pieces related to this continuum so that we can kind of start considering and envisioning where we might be at our own institutions. And so thinking about the organization, as you see that at the very top, the arrow starts from the left talking about a monoculture or a single culture and moves along a continuum, reaches some milestones, right? And so from one culture to focusing on not discriminating or a non-discriminating environment to a multicultural, and the arrow keeps going. If I were bold enough, and one day I will be, I would add to this theory and the arrow would reflect the term social justice or socially just as the next stage or era of an institution in terms of how they show up. But this helps us kind of see that there is progression that happens. In the boxes below, I'd like to kind of walk us through that. The very first state of being, if you will, the exclusionary box, really at this stage, an organization actively or openly promotes dominance and privilege of a majority or dominant group. Such values are integrated into every aspect of the organization, and rarely do these groups show any interest or concern in concepts of social justice or diversity, right? And so it's interesting, again, with this particular theory, I will share that the institution itself could be at that place, or a college could be at that place, or a department chair or department itself could be at that place. And so kind of think about this from multiple places, right? Stage two in this model, the club stage. This stage really focuses on the indirect support of white supremacy or supremacy period of a majority group. It may not be a white culture that we're talking about. Rather than providing explicit approval or justification for that existence. And so it's no longer actively or intentionally acts to explicitly exclude minoritized groups, but it does maintain the norm. It does maintain policies and practices of the dominant group, okay? And so any inclusion of these groups is typically very superficial, right? They might hang a poster, they might send an email, but nothing really changes in terms of the work happening at that stage. The third position, compliance. This stage is oriented to removing discrimination by increasing access. And so we might get to a place where we're looking at the students and or adding a faculty member who doesn't look like the rest of us. But it shows little interest in changing the underlying structure of the culture or system that it operates within. By focusing on compliance with things like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commissions, EEOCs, and other governmental guidelines about membership, organizations rarely move beyond tokenism. So you may see one woman in the group, you may see one person of color, and if they're, I hate to use the word savvy, they might have one woman of color who's also gay and maybe has a disability, so they can check all the boxes in one poor person. But that person is going to serve in isolation and not have true support from that system. And so think about that particular piece of compliance. I will say, well, let me say this before I forget. Each one of these stages or places of development is a very important place for a group or organization to get to. And so even though I might be a little snarky around a particular stage, I do see the importance and need for us to reach that moment of transition, right? Each of these are very important. And so I just wanted to mention that. As we move on, the fourth stage that's on the continuum is labeled affirming. In this fourth stage, the focus of the organization or institution increases its active efforts toward the recruitment and promotion of minoritized individuals, and often provides training to create a more affirming environment. We start understanding that there is more to just hiring folks. We need to do some work in the environment. However, the focus is still on not discriminating, rather than being inclusive or truly changing the system or the organization. Stage 5 takes us, it's labeled redefining, and it takes us to a place of transition where the organization or institution is more focused on embracing multiculturalism than simply reducing discrimination. There is doubt about traditional monoculture systems that lead to a more concerted effort toward finding methods and tools that will support a multicultural organization. Then we start really looking at who we were and who we want to be in this redefining stage. We open or enter into open conversation about those pieces, and everyone at the table gets to have voice. You start seeing some different practices emerge. The sixth stage on this particular continuum strives to incorporate a worldview. This is the multicultural stage for an organization or group. It looks at the interests and needs of all groups in every aspect of its organization. It is committed to eradicating oppression in all forms and relies on alternative approaches and strategies to achieve this goal. In the redefining stage and multicultural stage, I find that organizations and groups will start investing time and money into the conversation and into the work. Most of that significant shift happens in this model, in the multicultural change. This continuum, I offer it to you all as a visual, but also an excellent tool that, again, as I mentioned earlier, it helps us to assess, where are we, right? Where do we think we are as a group, as a department, as a college, as an institution? It helps us with diagnosing. It helps us also with visioning, and provides a process that will help an organization move to the next stage along the continuum. And so if you're looking to try to engage in conversation, this can give us a framework and some language around where are we, where do we want to be, and how can we get there? And that can be a very powerful, useful aspect of this model. Building from, yes.
Before we go forward, this is a very important question because folks are getting new language and terminology. So are the behaviors in exclusionary, I believe this is when this question came up, are they just explicit or implicit biases?
Oh, they can be both. I think that you're going to see a mix of both. In the exclusionary piece, you're going to, based on this model, it is an environment where folks feel like this is just how it always has been, and responsibility for navigating and being in this space is on the individual. And so me as a person of color entering an exclusionary environment, the attitude and the mode would overtly and covertly be, if you want to be here, then you need to figure out how to survive and how to navigate. It is on you. I would think an example of this might be if you've seen stories or read anything on how West Point or some of our military universities or colleges did with integration and or the inclusion of women soldiers and women cadets, right? Exclusionary would mean if you show up or if you're in, we do not do anything to make it easy or comfortable for you, right? And so nothing changes for diversity or for diverse individuals. And so some of it will be very overt, some of it will be very covert. I think it's a mix of both. The entire system is working against the difference, whatever that identity might be. And it's justified, which is the other very important piece of exclusionary at every level. It is given voice, in not just in its policies, but in the practices. Here we can look at traditions of an institution. Here we can look at a lot of different examples of that. Dr. Chandler, were there other questions that you wanted to touch on?
So Aisha asked one, but I think we start to unpack it next in the next slide. So I'm going to hold on to it for a second, but basically she wants to know of an example of a college that reached the multicultural stage. But I think the question after she hears the next slides will be what needs to be in place to reach a multicultural stage. So yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Absolutely. No, that's great. And you know, I would also offer this again, as I said earlier, we can look at this this continuum from the place of the overall college or institution, from a department, or from different places. And so, do we have? Is there an institution in the United States that has fully reached multicultural stage at every level and aspect of its organization? I don't know that that exists, right? I will have to think about that, but I don't believe that exists. I think this continuum and these stages give us something to look toward and to work toward. And it is a process that requires us to be fully engaged all the time. And so this isn't an end point, as some might feel, if that makes sense. It is something that we would have to continue looking at various aspects of our institution to be able to reach.
And the fluidity and nonlinear piece of it, right? So institutions will move. So yeah, I'll let you unpack.
No, please. I welcome your voice. I welcome your voice. But yes, I would agree with those pieces. Do you want to share more?
Nope.
Okay. Well, let's look.
I know you will. I know you will. We're good.
Let's look at then, as we continue considering this model, 4 components that are associated with an institution or an organization engaging in the change process. And so the first piece, there are 4 components that the authors offer us. The first piece is around coalition building, or what I call coalition building. The literature really names this agents, change agents. And what it encourages us to do is to identify and develop an internal team that can focus on and help reach or build change in an organization, and they name them change agents. And so I believe that this process is around us engaging in coalition building and figuring out who can our partners be in this conversation. And I would say not just in one area, but how can we secure champions across an institution to really embrace this process. Again, we need to assess, we need to figure out where we are and diagnose ourselves, but then we need to engage in visioning. And in order for those things to happen, we're going to need to work with a team or a group of folks. The second piece that this motto offers us in terms of components in the change process is considering readiness. It is determining the readiness of a system for change. In this piece, what I like to highlight the most is looking for opportunities for us to engage in a change process. And so, you know, I have been sharing on my campus at the University of California that COVID, as horrible as this pandemic has been, it gives us a moment to reset some things. It gives us an opportunity to figure out who has been excluded, who is being excluded. How do we need to change our work? What do we need to do? What do we need to do in this moment of pause in some aspect? And so that can provide some of us an opportunity. Other opportunities that are systemic wide, I would offer accreditation. If your institution is looking at or going through reaccreditation, that might be an opportunity that we can use to align and build a coalition to make significant change in our system. The last piece, because it came out just a few weeks ago, is rankings. And so if our institution is about the rankings and about figuring out where we are and how to highlight the good at our institution, then it may be an opportunity for us to consider how through assessment can we look at bringing about change and improvements to our campus that may align with what our presidents or chancellors are looking to establish, or our college deans. And so there may be different aspects of opportunities that we can connect this work to, and that is a component of change. The third piece is on assessment, implementing assessment and benchmarking. It is important to hold on to this piece because it gives us an understanding that this change process around cultural competency is also a data-driven process. We need to figure out where our current system is and then design where we want to go from there based on assessment. And so many of you talked earlier about infusing or bringing in the voices of our students. That is very important, and bringing in the voices of our community can be just as important. And so keep that in mind. The last component of change in this process speaks to engaging in a change planning process. And in that, we would also develop and strategize around implementation, and just as important, reevaluation. We don't want to launch into new practices without having a plan to see if those things are moving the needle in the direction that we want to go. And so these are the four components to change associated with looking at how our organizational development is doing. These components, again, provide a guideline as we prepare to engage with the change process. Next, what I'd like to do, I'll pause in just a moment, but to see if there are any questions about these four components. But I also want us to next think about revisiting the models that were introduced in the articles as we get ready to move forward. And I want us to consider the multicultural change intervention matrix that was in the image of that model was provided. And so we will engage with that next. But before we move forward, I don't want to move too quickly. Were there any thoughts or reactions to these four components?
One that I have is readiness, and I think that this is a fantastic place to sit for a moment, because we can lay out the best plans and have the terrific model, but the readiness of the people and of the institution to grasp the idea, that piece is essential. And it really gets to going back to what we discussed earlier, making sure that there's that individual level across the campus, that individual awareness and understanding and acceptance that there is a problem and we're making a commitment, because the readiness also has to do with, are people feeling like, oh, well, we've got this, or we're doing well. So I like that you brought up the rankings and the accreditations, those things that if it means something in a different way, we may be able to leverage it to say, hey, if we want to improve or move to this point, then this is going to help us get there. So while it may be primary in our views, there may be a way that we can use what's going on in the larger community of the college to tap into readiness.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Other thoughts, other questions?
I'm trying to catch up. Jennifer highlighted the importance in how helpful compliance was. I think a lot of us see that after George Floyd, this quick response, but it's really being compliant, right?
Yeah, I'll add to that. That figure, I'm learning so much from this training. I just will say, but the figure before the last one that you showed was just so powerful for me, because my experience has been, well, we just need to hire more women. We just need to hire more women of color. We just need to hire more Hispanics, and they'll take care of the problem. And that's not what it is. We need to work within the people that we have at the table today. I mean, we still need to be doing those things, obviously, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done to really institute change. So seeing how far over compliance is on that continuum just was really powerful for me.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm actually in the middle of accreditation. And so Actually, our visit is next week. And I oversee our Bachelor's of Social Work program at Pacific Oaks College. And I have and it's a new program. We actually just kicked it off in this fall. And this is a great opportunity to integrate a lot of what you've mentioned today. And what stood out to me is, and by me being very new to this is actually my first accreditation. And so I'm looking forward to it. No, not for real. But anyway, when you mentioned about incorporating, especially the cultural competencies, because all of my students are Latina females. And so for me, I'm looking at ways to bring in more Latina social workers. And so I've reached out to a lot of my mentees and former colleagues and getting them involved. And hopefully soon we'll be able to hire adjuncts to fill those roles. But in the meantime, what suggestions do you have to articulate this when I'm putting together in preparation for the accreditation, and as we get ready for an assessment review for the entire school?
No, that's a beautiful question. I think there are going to be some resources that I'll send your way after our presentation as well, Mary. But one of the things that I think about is as we're talking about where we are, as we're responding to whatever prompts or questions during your visit, keeping this in mind and saying that there's room for progress and there are goals that we have to continue progressing. If you write it into your plan, then there will be institutional support that comes from that. And so that's one of the pieces that I would share with you, is that as you engage with your visit, if there are areas of growth that are given to you, using the competencies to help develop your plan of action to move forward is going to be very important. And so I will definitely forward some pieces. I need to retrieve some pieces, but I can definitely forward. We went through accreditation. Dr. Chandler, didn't we go through accreditation 3 years ago now at Florida State? And so I'll definitely look back to see if there's some things I can share with you to hopefully be helpful.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
And they are not shy about these things anymore. So you will hear them.
Well, definitely sending you good vibes for your visit that's coming up. All right, good folks. Well, let me get back to screen sharing. Want to share and review this one piece and then get us into some conversation to move us from considering these aspects to putting them into action. And so as we continue our conversation, looking at our multicultural change intervention matrix is where I want us to go. Hold on, let me see if I can get the PowerPoint to move forward. All right, so here's our model. This particular model, the multicultural intervention matrix, as it is labeled, has two major dimensions. The first focuses on the possible targets of a multicultural intervention, which include on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the individual can be a target of change, a group can be a target of change, and the institution itself can be a target of change. The second dimension of this model identifies two levels or types of intervention, and you'll see them more toward the middle and right side of the chart. The first is first order change, and the second is second order change. First order change in this particular metrics really speaks to one within a system that does not create change in the structure of the system. This type of change maintains the coherence of a system. And so really the first order change is around awareness, but awareness doesn't change what's happening, right? It just makes us aware of what might be happening. I'll give examples in just a moment. Membership and programmatic pieces are considered first order change for each category. And so as we look at the metrics, first order change for an individual is awareness. First order change for a group might be membership. First order change for the institution is the programmatic pieces, and we'll give examples of that in a moment. When we get to second order change for the individual is a paradigm shift. This is a shift in our cognitive thinking of our environment. Second order change for a group is restructuring and re-envisioning how we do our work. And then second order change for the institution is systemic. And so how do we get to creating change at the system level? And so let me go into, as we get ready to dig into this model a little bit more, I want to say that some of the foundations, or another way of illustrating this particular radical transition necessary for second order change, is through the use of one of our more familiar Gestalt psychological perception figures. This figure, I like to use this. There are a couple of different ones I like to use, but this one is one that's very well known. This figure can be perceived either as an old woman with a large nose, or a young woman with fine features wearing a hat with a feather in it. The idea behind this particular piece is that to be able to see both images in the figure, one must concentrate and make a concerted effort to view the figure differently from one's initial perception. This effort is similar to a paradigm shift that is needed to create second order change in an organization, in groups, or as individuals. We have to be able to make an effort, or be prepared to make an effort, to see things differently than our initial perception. And so the Gestalt theory piece is very heavily pulled into this particular model. As I mentioned earlier, the metrics offer 6 ways to conceptualize and structure multicultural change efforts. By increasing our understanding of the range of targets and goals that can be used, we can more easily expand the types of activity, strategies, and tools that we implement in creating change. And so I want us to kind of go through each of the components of change, moving from first order to second order change. As you see here in cell A, speaks to first order change for an individual. It is labeled awareness. Typically, this involves educating people through a training, a workshop. It involves looking at the increasing knowledge, or possibly some skill training. This type of educational effort is often consent focused, meaning it is not required or mandatory. And examples can be things like a cultural competency workshop, or anti-racist seminars or workshops that are happening on our campuses right now across the country. The next example, or the next cell that we have, is cell B, which really highlights or captures second order change for the individual. It is labeled paradigm shift. This is primarily aimed, as I mentioned, at the cognitive restructuring level. This is kind of the aha moments that we strive for, when individuals experience transformation in their worldview about the oppression or the life experience of another group. One of the things that I build into my own philosophy around diversity work is I believe that to change people's minds and hearts, we must engage with the story of other people. I think that that is the most effective approach to helping folks transition or have paradigm shifts, is to engage with many stories of people who are similar and different to us in terms of the work that we're engaged in. And so paradigm shift, again, speaks to the cognitive restructuring of our that we experience. Moving into the group as target change, cell C speaks to first order change, which is membership. And membership really speaks to change in the composition of a group, in which members of underrepresented groups are added, but there is no change in the goals, the work, or the norms of that group. At this stage, it's kind of like when one person enters a group that is different, they're handed the manual and are told, you got to do it how it's written. Here it is. Follow the table of contents. If you have questions, let us know, but we're not interested in change. And so Thank you for being here, and you're going to do it our way. That's how I like to operationalize this particular piece of change. The membership category really focuses on diversity in terms of number without examining the interpersonal or systemic dynamics of a group. And examples, again, could be hiring a person of color or white women on staff without altering the environment or examining or modifying the mission and vision of a group. Next, we have restructuring, which is cell D. This is second order change for a group. This might involve totally restructuring of a group with a new mission, new goals, new vision statements that include the voice and experiences of the members that have been added to the team. This examines the makeup of the group. At this place, the group is going to also consider the values and goals that it had prior to making new changes to the group. So why did we get here? Why did we feel important enough to add different identities to our work group or our space? New members are involved in this process of self-examining and the planning as well. Examples can be the approach would require reexamination of the mission and purpose of a unit and allows multicultural issues to be integrated into the central mission of a department, a group, a team. Next, we get to the institutional level, and we're going to look at cell E, the programmatic cell. This is first order change for the institution. This might involve programmatic interventions aimed at the institution or division that address multicultural issues, but does not alter the underlying values or structures of an institution. And so examples of this could be creating a new position in a college that will focus on diversity and inclusion, or developing sensitivity training, or adding cultural competency to the mission statement without changing anything like a performance evaluation or staffing requirements or expectations, annual reviews, budgetary criteria. And so when we just add a word to a mission statement, that might be this programmatic piece. When we add expectations to annual reviews and establish accountability measures for department heads and deans and things of that nature, that may be required to get us to the next place, which is cell F. Cell F speaks to second order change for the institution. This requires more direct examination of underlying institutional values, goals, and evaluations that are linked to multicultural values and efforts. Examples of this, as I was mentioning, could require goal-directed interventions or initiatives that all of the divisional units on a campus would have to connect to. This could be connected to budget allocations, base hiring, evaluations, promotions, decisions on individual, how we measure progress, right? And documenting that. And so as we look at these pieces, there are three significant uses for this metrics. One is assessment. We've mentioned that with the continuum as well. Second, this metrics can help us with strategic planning. And third, this metrics can also be used in the curricular transformation. And so if we want to look at our efforts in the academy, we can also use this metrics to figure out what is surface level and what really gets to change in our coursework or in our curriculum. And so I want to take a moment and in just a second, the next piece I want us to move to is to get back into discussion rooms. And what I'd like for us to engage in is looking at your institution's mission statement and maybe discussing an example of either first order change that you might be able to acknowledge or see, or second order change that you have observed. And then you get to pick the target. It could be a message that lives in individual change, group change, or institutional change. So that's where we're heading. But I wanted to just pause for a moment before we go into breakout rooms and see if there are any questions or thoughts about the metrics itself.
Can you talk about whether or not there's a priority of first order, second order, or are they both of value or not?
Absolutely, that's a great piece. I think that both are very valuable. I think that in order to move us from along the continuum, we need to look at and engage with both. I'll give you an example. At Florida State University, when I was there, I was really making sure that folks knew that we were listed as an emerging Hispanic serving institution. And one of the pieces that I engaged us in is the process of developing a Latinx celebration that mirrored our MLK celebration. We'd been engaged in a beautiful ceremony for honoring Martin Luther King Jr. and his ideals at Florida State for the last 30 years. But we had never really looked at engaging or elevating or even creating space for us to consider a new emerging identity on our campus that represented 21% of the student body at that point. And so we were able to move to a programmatic change piece where we instituted the Latinx cultural celebration that happens during Hispanic Heritage Month now at Florida State. And so that was an example of a need. Systemically, we're going to need to get, in order to move from first order change institutionally to second order change, we need acknowledgement. We need to be able to say, yes, this is a population that is significant and important to our campus. Now let's start looking at what systemic order change or second order change looks like at the systemic level of the institution. I'm hoping that at some point, a member of the president's cabinet is hired that represents the identity. I'm hoping that at some point we create Latinx studies and establish physical structures that allow for research and cultural gathering to move to the next level at Florida State. So those are examples. I think both are needed. And I think both need to be nurtured along the process. Any other questions or thoughts? Cool. Well, then I'd love to move us then into our next breakout room. And so please enjoy your conversations. We'll be in this room for about 7 minutes, if I remember correctly, Leslyn, is that right?
But we could do 7.
Perfect. And so enjoy your conversations, and I look forward to welcoming you back in just a moment. Folks, welcome back. And so would love to jump into debriefing. What is an example of first order change or second order change that you all discussed in your groups?
Cherie and I from Pacific Oaks, we started with looking at our institutional mission, and I'll read it. It's grounded in its social work heritage. Pacific Oaks College prepares students to be culturally intelligent agents of change, serving diverse communities in the fields of human development, education, and related family studies. And Cherie has been there longer than I have. I actually started in July, the end of July, so she can speak more to what has taken place on that. So I'll turn it over to her.
I mentioned this in the other group. So, you know, we have a strong background in social justice heritage. The school was founded by Quakers. And so, of course, the Quakers' mission, you know, was inclusion, you know, social justice and all of that. Our curriculum is based on that. We do a great job of teaching the students. However, pulling back and looking at the administrative part and how the culture of our administration has changed over time. And it's due to, you know, new things with WASC, and, you know, many colleges are moving to this business model. And then the types of people we get in administration, I feel like there's a disconnect with our mission that we're still trying to hold on to versus new ideas of people. I call it the outside people coming into the school. And how do we bring that together? And so I think it's kind of hard because I call our faculty and staff that's been there, been there at the school for a long time, our elders holding on. It's like a fight between the two. And so how do we bring that together? And I said we have these discussions, but I think we don't have enough time to really dive in deep. So just really putting together those intentional workshops and come together, because I feel like we're always bumping heads, but I think if we had more time and spend intentional time talking about these things, we can change things. And I think in our first group, I said a lot of time is spent on us being talked at with little room for discussions. And so just more time to really dive into it and not doing it just once a year, more times throughout the year, and
Yes.
and maybe like there's a little homework that goes with it. When we come back, we're going to follow up and talk about this and how do we do that, and just kind of pilot it, and it becomes more part of the institution. So
Absolutely. And so you make me think of, so an example of the individual first order change that may be helpful for your campus is really in creating or investing in the awareness and knowledge of the mission itself and the history of the campus. And then second order change would represent an individual or faculty member hitting that aha moment and saying, all right, I need to incorporate these values into the way I approach teaching on this campus, right? And so those are that's really good assessment in terms of where are you right now, and then using the metrics to help move them along, right? Acknowledging that they may not fully be on board, but using the connection to your elders to help them move along. Excellent review. Thank you all. Is there another group that wants to share an example of first or second order change that they discussed based on their mission statement? No worries. Go ahead. I hear Teresa, maybe.
Sure, I can talk. So this might be a little bit derailing, but one thing that we noticed in both of our mission statements was there was a lot mentioned about first order change, and they might try to touch on second order change, but knowing or doing the work, it's not the case. So for example, my statement talks about to provide a wide range of students with educational opportunity only a leading research university can offer, to foster scholarship and practices that will reflect and respond to increasing diversity, and to create knowledge that transforms our views of the world and through sharing and application transforms the world. So there's a bit here about kind of membership offering students opportunities, but very little about transforming the space to make it comfortable or a place where we can actually retain our students of color. As well as faculty, we've lost so many. Even this transforming the world, as a part of someone who's working on abolition at our organization, we have all of the data we've kind of compiled reports, and still the administration is not listening to us at all. So there's a lot of talk, but as far as actually doing the change, we're not able to get there.
No. Thank you for sharing, and I'm sorry for that struggle. And I believe that this metrics could help use the language of the matrix, could help frame the wonderful data that you have into actionable pieces for the administration. Sometimes it's almost like having to learn a different language, right? To frame things in a way that they're like, oh, okay, I get it. right? Not that we are not intelligent or smart, not that we can't get there at some point, but the strategy around communication is very key in that process. And so thank you for sharing that piece. All right, friends, one thing I want to do is to share my screen again and take us into just presenting one more activity for our time together. And let me see if I can get us, let's see. Technology struggles. Bear with me 2 seconds. I think I need to expand first and then there we go. All right. One piece that I will post in the Google Classroom that I want to recommend for you all to engage with on your own is another TED Talk that I absolutely find lots of value in. My goal was to share that TED Talk with you all. And so in the Google Classroom, you'll find the link to the TED Talk entitled The Secret to Change in the World by Le Mois. There is also a transcript associated with that particular TED Talk. I want to share that with you all as something to follow up on your own, because I think it, again, gives us an opportunity to engage with his work and see if we can identify examples of first and second order change through his work. Just a phenomenal social activist, researcher, educator. Would definitely want you all to be familiar with him if you are not yet. But for the time that we have left, I wanted to give us one more opportunity to use a case study scenario where we can engage with and try to identify first and second order change in that case study. And so in this particular piece, in the chat room, you're going to see a link to 2 different case studies. One case study is geared toward faculty and the other case study is geared toward administrators or staff. Would love for you all to take a few moments to read through the case study and see what you take away from Dr. H and Dr. Brown. Those are the 2 faculty or administrators that we're going to engage with in terms of their experience and their work with students. Would love for you to discuss the case study and identify the key issues. And how would you, if you were going to apply the theoretical models that we've talked about today, how would you apply them to their scenarios that are presented in those case studies? And then finally, if you were a consultant, how would you intervene in those situations if there was a need to intervene at all? So would love to give us, I would say 10 minutes for this next one. Let me think. Yeah, I would say 10 minutes for this next round. And so spend a few moments reviewing, accessing via the chat, and we'll move into a breakout room to discuss. Everyone, I am sure y'all have more to say about Dr. H and Dr. Brown. I see some smiles and some head nods, but I want to be very respectful of y'all's time. We got about 8 minutes left. And so I'd love to hear maybe from 1 or 2 groups, maybe one group that engaged with the case study focused on Dr. H. What'd y'all think?
I just wanted to say that I can relate. I oversee a community psychology program, and so I have students who are taking GE courses in psychology, and and they're dropping their prerequisites. Um, and I'm just like, what is, what was going on? So I think, and I'm going to keep this short for, we're getting ready to go through program review for all of the schools. And so that's one of the things that I want to, do over the years to talk about that issue with that department. But also just, who do we hire and how do they fit in with the culture of our students at this school? Because many of our adjuncts teach at different institutes. And I know what the issue is, but just talking about it and how do we solve that and make the students more, the connections, because many of the students are in online classes. So then that's another layer on top of that. So I'm just going to keep that really short.
It is a complex process. Thank
Mhm.
you for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing. Other takeaways? What came up for you all in your discussions around either one of these case studies?
I can share from
Go ahead.
I can share from our group. I was with Jennifer, and we discussed. She teaches biology, I teach chemistry, so I can actually teaching chemistry and STEM. Anybody who teaches STEM would know how content heavy it is, and it's difficult to have these conversations with students, because sometimes students are like, "Why are you talking to me about this again?" But you have to sort of naturally intentionally but naturally make it organic, so it should flow in and out of the content, and that takes time. It's something that you would have, or just one fine morning, but you have to make a start one day and you'll get better at it. So in the last 2 terms, ever since COVID hit especially, I started doing a similar activity that Dr. H actually had. And students enjoyed that. And it's very evident that they would pick, a scientist who they can associate with, and in terms of how they looked. And sometimes there were students who would email me, "I don't know who to pick. Can you help me pick?" And it could be that in their identity wheel, what they really identify with, they don't know about a scientist, right? So they did not have anybody to pick. So it was very interesting. And then we are like, okay, it is an assignment, but I'm at the back of it, I'm thinking, we don't know much about the autobiography or the biography of this particular scientist they really like, but how do you make that connection? So sometimes that can be a challenge.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And Miss Aja?
Yeah, I guess she has some of the same words that we were thinking about, that you have to be intentional about making those changes. One thing that struck me that was really smart is that it's often hard to change the diversity of faculty, because faculty are hired very rarely, but that it's much easier to change TAs because they cycle out every year. In addition, TAs are much closer to students. So by making your TA population more diverse, you're kind of hitting, 2 birds with 1 stone. It is much easier to address. It's kind of low-hanging fruit, and because students can relate much more to the TAs than you can to faculty.
Absolutely. It can definitely be a strategy. And we see that, I think, in Dr. Brown's approach in working with the TAs. I hope that in both case studies, either one that you work with, I encourage you to check out the other case study on your own, and the student comments that are included. The names of the innocent have been changed to protect the guilty, as we say sometimes. And so, but the stories are real. And so definitely engage with the stories and the voice of some of our students that are embedded in the case studies. I think that they're rich for consideration. Just to wrap up our time today, because I definitely do not want to go too far over. You may not come back for the 3rd session if I'm not honoring your time. I wanted just to share a quick closing thought and then invite you all to engage with some just final announcements for the program. As we wrap up today's conversation about administration and leadership, I do believe, and many of you have given voice today, that far too many campuses, organizations, administrators, scholars, and leaders at times seek immediate and short-term processes or quick fixes when things are presented, when challenges come up on our campuses. However, I do believe that to truly affect institutional change, it will take sustained commitment, systemic and systematic processes, and us identifying effective tools and strategies to respond to the challenges that we're facing. The unjust academic system that we have inherited and the way that we have been socialized in our work by many generations, or has taken many generations to establish. And so we cannot expect to undo or redirect all of this in 1 quarter or 1 semester. Collectively, though, through coalition building, through walking each other home, and that's a reference to the TED Talk that I definitely hope that you all will engage with. I do believe that we can change higher education for the better. And so thank you all so much for engaging today in our conversation. I hope that it has been helpful, and know that although our time to try to pull all of these thoughts and conversations into 2 hours may be challenging, I wanted to offer you all an opportunity to continue our dialogue and connection. Dr. Cummings, would you like to share a little bit more about how we can further engage beyond today?
Hi, everybody. I usually like to just be quiet because, Dr. Hernandez is phenomenal. But we, at the center, we're really pushing to be in a position to be able to give voice to the experiences that our faculty are having at different institutions and administrators. And so what we offer is an opportunity for you to continue in this work with us. And by doing this, you would do the theory to action research. And that would give you this awesome opportunity to have a conversation one-on-one with Dr. Hernandez, milk him for some more wisdom. But more importantly is that for so many of these places where we're trying to promote student engagement and student presence, we don't see in the literature a voice that comes from HBCUs, minority serving institutions, community colleges. That means that the story is limited. And so we want to invite you to become a part of what we're doing around change and being a catalyst agent for your campus and for the field at large. So you're going to receive an invitation from our lovely Ada. And what I want you to do is to really think about this, because it sounds like everybody's already in the business of creating the most transformational, the most awesome opportunity for their students on their campus and for their colleagues. Join us in being able to make that something that's not just in your classroom, not the individual level, not just your institution, but something that we do to impact the educational field as a whole.